This is Horror Podcast.
Welcome to This is Horror, a podcast for readers, writers, and creators. I'm Michael David Wilson, and every episode alongside my co-host Bob Pastorella, we chat with masters of horror about writing, life lessons, creativity, and much more. Now today's guest is Paul Tremblay, the author of the recently released The Pallbearers Club and other books including The Cabin at the End of the World and A Head Full of Ghosts. And this is the second in a two-part conversation with Paul. If you want to listen to the first, then go back one episode to 467, but as with all of these, you can listen in any order. Now, in this episode, we dig into so much, including unreliable first-person narrators, anxiety and depression, and the Pallbearers Club book tour. Now, before we get into any of that, a little bit of an advert break.
Hello. This is Sarah Pembera. Very much looking forward to being at Horror on Main. I fully expect to see you all there. I want to see every single one of you there. Thank you very much. Very excited. Bye.
Horror on Main, a new weekend convention for the horror community. We explore all the shadows within horror entertainment, including writers and actors, but also artists, publishers, directors, and composers. We've been going to conventions for over 20 years and are changing up the little things to make the big picture amazing. Join us Memorial Day weekend 2023 in Hunt Valley, Maryland. Come to the block party and meet your new neighbors. See horroronmain.com for details.
Tried and True or Done to Death. It Was All a Dream, an anthology of bad horror tropes done right, revives even the most exhausted cliches with stories from some of horror's biggest names like Gemma Files, Gabinio Iglesias, and Haley Piper. It Was All a Dream, an anthology of bad horror tropes done right, available anywhere you buy books online. Use this code ThisIsHorror for 20% off through the month of October when you order direct from HungryShadowPress.com.
Okay, with that said, here it is. It is Paul Tremblay on This is Horror. You know, Art says that he will be painfully honest, which is, of course, classic from the Unreliable Narrator.
Sure.
But, it does make me think, how can any of us in any situation be truly honest when our point of view is subjective and heavily biased towards ourselves, and added to which memory is unreliable?
Right. No, absolutely. I mean, that's why, I think, every, any first person narrator is inherently unreliable. You're getting everything through their filter. So, and I take that to heart, like, very seriously when I choose a point of view. Like, if that's, it's a big part of the reason why Cabin was never a first. None of Cabin is in first person, and same with Survivor Song. Now there's ambiguity in Cabin at the End of the World, but sort of a different approach to it. In Survivor Song, I didn't want there to be. So, with obviously it being a found memoir, it had to be first person. But it's interesting you mentioned like Art saying that at the beginning. I kind of feel like Art's first chapter is very short, and Mercy's right after is very short. And I think I'd hoped those first few pages sort of set up the rules for the whole book. Art says he's going to be painfully honest, and if someone feels the need to tell you that they're going to be painfully honest, that that probably should put you on guard instantly. Maybe, I don't know. And similarly, Mercy follows that up with. I'm not going to say it exactly, but she says something to the effect that, I know there will be differences in our memory of certain events, but just because we remember things differently doesn't necessarily mean that one of us is lying. Which again is sort of like an interesting thing to say out loud or to put into text. Is Mercy already gaslighting us? gaslighting us as well as Art, or is that just like an honest sort of observation? Yeah, so I wanted that out there sort of right away. The intentions of the story.
Yeah.
Yeah, just basically sets up like the ambiguity naturally. And that's, you don't really have to work hard at it at that point. That's
right.
It's like, okay, I've already done this. Now just tell the story.
So no, thanks, Bob. I think that's a great way of putting it. Yeah, because even something like, I guess, A Head Full of Ghosts. I guess if this book has sort of stuff in common, I think it has more in common with A Head Full of Ghosts than, as we had discussed in the previous episode, the most two recent novels.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but the idea of like, the first person narrator admitting that, hey, I know what I remember might not exactly be exactly how it happened, but this is what I'm stuck with, and this is what you're stuck with too.
You feel like going into that the different POV, that you need that distance. In other words, like the distance between being constantly in her head compared to being able to hop in her head. That distance kind of it's like a sliding scale, or like a sliding rule about how ambiguous can I get.
Oh, for sure. I think with first person narrators you can sort of hide the most as a storyteller, because it is restricted to that one person's point of view. Third person, it's really hard to do because you don't want it to come off as like, oh, it's a cheat because you're withholding information, and it's kind of hard to do from third person. Although you could do there's close third person, obviously, which is not quite the same as, but similar to first person.
Right.
Man, I wish I could remember how exactly he put it, but I'd asked Stuart Onan about his novel, A Prayer for the Dying. And if you haven't read it, you should. But A Prayer for the Dying is second person. And I'm fascinated as to why he went with that choice. And, and he talked about the distance that he needed for the main character, the preacher / undertaker of this Wisconsin town. He said third was too far away, first was too close. Just to boil it down, is like, in second was sort of right in the middle, and also somehow bringing the reader in a little bit too, in a different way. So, I think about point of view a lot. It's pretty rare that I change in the middle of a book. I typically don't. That's something I think long and hard about. Point of view is certainly should never be a default mode of storytelling. It should be like everything else. It has to serve the story that you're going to tell in the best way possible. So, a little bit lucky with this book with Pallbearers, since it was going to be a found memoir. Obviously, I knew I had to have Art's first person point of view. But what really excited me about the book was having Mercy as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, and of course, in this book, Art is trying to discover himself throughout. So I wonder, with the writing, did you find yourself discovering yourself through writing this? And how much do you find self-discovery and moments of revelation through your writing?
Oh, that's a great question. I'm not sure. Let me answer it this way, because someone much smarter than me talked about this in a book. George Saunders wrote a book called A Swim in the Pond in the Rain. And when did that come out? About a year ago? And in it, it's basically almost like, hey, this is one of his graduate writing classes. He takes 7 Russian short stories and presents them in different ways. And he basically talks about like why the story works, and sort of like how he likes to teach his class with it and stuff like that. Some of which, I thought a lot of it was very interesting, having never taught like writing classes, or certainly not that often. But at one point in the book, he talked about how the goal of a writer, and I'm really boiling this down and probably butchering it, but like the idea that the book that you end up writing, if you do your job well enough, that book is a better person than you are. or a better representation than you are yourself. I mean, because you, the writer, is such a, everybody's like this flawed, wonderful but flawed human being. And the idea that the book, in the book, that its message and how it's told is somehow like better than you are. And I'm sort of butchering how he presented it to me, but I sort of really liked, and I like that idea of like my books are certainly smarter than I am in the moment. Like I certainly stumble over my words and can't. I certainly don't feel comfortable talking extemporaneously about so many different things. But like with a book, I can take my time. I can spend weeks rewriting like the same like 5 pages or 10 pages until it becomes this thing that's mine, but also outside of me. So in terms of the original question about self-discovery, I went into the book, Michael, with what I thought was self-discovery. Like I had somehow, I don't know, like I'm sure you and Bob are asked this all the time. Writers are asked why you write, but horror writers are always, why do you write horror? Why do you write horror? Right? It's, I don't know, like sometimes I just want to be like, well, why don't you write horror? Like, why isn't everybody writing horror? Like, I don't understand, like, why you wouldn't. And so this isn't necessarily like the horror part of it, but like the idea of like, why do I write? Like, well, how did I go from math major to writing stuff? And this is prior to writing the book. I felt like, my self-discovery, and I don't know if it's true or not. I think there's some truth to it, but I don't think it's the whole truth. But I started thinking, okay, I write because, like, many people didn't have a great time socially, not within my family, but within, school age, high school. I had a pretty miserable time in high school. I think I write because I'm still trying to prove to that teenager inside of me that I have something worth saying. Which, I don't know. I hope there's more to why I write than that, like in retrospect, now that I've sort of lived with that thought for a while. But that was sort of like one of the impetuses or starting points of Pallbearers Club. Is like, well, if I really dig into this, maybe, I don't know, maybe I could discover something more about why I write, or maybe this could, sort of write out some of that, silly poison that I keep bottled up inside, and some of the resentment and stuff like that. Didn't quite work out that way in either of those ways, but I'm certainly very proud of the book, and I'm glad I wrote it. It was certainly a different writing experience than anything else that I had written, because it was so like close to my own vest, to pun on a phrase.
Yeah, and with regard to that inner poison, there's so much anxiety and depression within the novel.
Yeah. I mean, part of it was an exploration of it, and I don't know, I'm sort of like hemming and hawing because I'm not quite sure how I want to say it and what I want to say. In some ways, this book thematically represents like my relationship with writing, and how it's sort of intertwined, sometimes healthily, sometimes not healthily, with my mental health. And Mercy's voice very much represents my inner editor, not only in terms of writing, but just in me living my life. The voice in your head that tells you you're being an idiot. But yeah, I mean, I guess the short answer is, Art is definitely, someone who is suffering with that, particularly, as he gets older, and he can recognize it in himself. Although, there's a bit, hopefully this isn't a spoiler, but there's a bit where he's talking about what he can or can't do about the situation that he's in, and in the context of the book, he's actually talking about what's he going to do now with this knowledge of vampirism. But you could certainly just read it as him talking about like how does he deal with sort of his mental state.
Yeah, and with regards to mental health issues, and with battling anxiety and doubt and things like that, I mean, how much does that still play a part of your life, and how do you navigate it?
I don't know.
I've got sort of, coping mechanisms, and, as I mentioned earlier, maybe it was the previous episode, that, things with my teaching job and writing job seem to be increasing in levels of amount of responsibilities, but also amounts of stress, like just being a human. And in the wonderful, delightful 2020s adds to those stresses as well. But at the same time, some of the, I guess, the more is the more overt and difficult aspects of anxiety and stuff like that really sort of kicked in when I was writing A Head Full of Ghosts, oddly enough. Yeah, so I don't know. It's hard to explain. It's something I don't normally like to talk about, and when there's certainly like no shame part of it, but it's also just like I'm not sure how to talk about it, like how to talk about it intelligently. So the idea of writing a book that's smarter than you are was sort of, again, part of the goal with the Pallbearers Club.
Yeah, yeah. And did you want to talk about what some of the coping mechanisms are, or would you rather move on?
Oh, well, I mean, I can even, sure, I can talk about it, like, even in terms of, let's focus it, let's narrow it to sort of the writing life.
Mm,
Um, because I know we have talked in the past um, about sort of when my writing career, I thought, was in the tank forever. After
mm.
Little Sleep and No Sleep
Yeah,
to
yeah.
Wonderland, how I spent a few years just being really sort of bitter and jealous. So, part of the coping mechanisms that I try to apply, certainly in the writing life, is if I'm feeling really down or bad, uh, and just sort of like spiraling around like a certain sort of emotion or feeling, if I can recognize that I'm doing that, I say, okay, I try to, say, okay, let's take a breath. And, when did the spiral start? Like, what made you think like this? Or, why were you having a moment of jealousy, or why were you having a moment of frustration in regards to writing? And for most of the times, I'm able to sort of uh, identify what what sent that off. And more times than not, I'm able to be like, okay, I I I felt that way because of this thing. And once I make that identification, that usually allows me sort of to break out of like a spiraling sort of cycle. Um, so I guess that would be one way of coping.
Mm. So identify the problem, and it is there's almost a commonality to, once you can see the monster or once you can explain the ghost, you become less afraid of it.
Sure, I know there's definitely yeah a comfort in there's a comfort in knowledge, right? We talked
Mm.
earlier, even just tonight, like the idea of there being discomfort, or some of the scariest parts of horror is like when you don't know, you're not sure. um, I think that applies to all aspects of life, right? It's always scariest when you don't know.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, because of the format of this book, and perhaps too, because it's horror, but it's very much not horror in a traditional sense. It's got a format that's intriguing. It's difficult to be neatly pigeonholed into, frankly, anything. I mean, we've seen in terms of the critical reaction from readers and critics alike, this seems to be a very polarizing book, perhaps your most
Oh, goody.
polarizing. So, I mean, when you see people reacting so passionately, both negatively and positively, I mean, does this give you a thrill that you've created something that it's dividing people, but it's making them talk about it?
um, yeah, so to be totally honest, as Art Barber would say, I mean, I'd say on the more rational part of me, definitely is thrilled. Like, I think, again, the rational part, I would much prefer strong reactions than like meh or no reactions at
Mm,
all. The rational part of me will go on Goodreads and see that a genius like Megan Abbott and Peter Straub, their their books have averaged like 3.2 stars.
yeah.
Um, and I I sort of I laugh on their behalfs at sort of like I don't know, the people who don't get it, and I marvel
Mm.
at, how could you possibly not get, what Megan Abbott or Peter Straub are doing. Um, the irrational side of me, and which is the part that always takes things too personally, too seriously. And in this book, that's actually been one of the bigger challenges for this book compared to prior books, is because I put so much of autobiography into art. It's hard not to take that a little personally with if you come across like, oh, art is so annoying, or like, oh man. It's hard not to take that as a personal judgment, but which is a weird thing to say, again, because rationally, as a writer, it's the first thing hopefully you try to learn, or at least try to recognize that, like, hey, someone talking about your book is not a personal judgment about you, the person, or if it is, it's not a very, very in-depth or yeah, I would say very, very not in-depth or accurate sort of personal judgment. But I don't know. There it is. Like, for someone who who thought or thinks that he writes because he wanted to prove people wrong. I mean, that sort of hinges on the attention that you get, right? The idea that
Mm.
you do want attention, or that I want attention, but maybe I don't want it. Maybe I don't want too much of it. I only want a certain kind. Which is impossible to ask for when you're dealing with putting something out into the world and having it's not yours anymore, kind of thing. Yeah. So what a I don't know, what a non-answer about dealing with the reactions to the book. I try to avoid it, frankly. Like, I do a great job of not reading reviews on Goodread. I feel like someone should
Mm.
hire me. Someone should hire me. That's my job. Not reading my reviews on Goodreads. But
Yeah.
I've found I've become very bad at not reading things that come across, like my Instagram, which is now the bigger sort of culprit, because reviews of the book will just show up in the feed. And maybe that means that I need to, like, shut off, like, following hashtags and stuff like that. So there's always, I don't know, there's always ways. I need to curate better.
Yeah, it's difficult, particularly if it shows up. I mean, there's not clicking a good, the Goodreads link, but if you're on Instagram and then you see the thumbnail for your book, I mean, it's gonna take tremendous restraint not to click on it. And I suppose
Yeah,
too, until you click the bloody thing, you don't know if it was a good or a bad one. At least with Goodreads, there's a star indicator, but just a picture of the book. It's kind of Russian roulette.
sure. No, I mean, obviously it's my fault, but the thing with Instagram is like, oh, that's like a really pretty staged picture of the book.
Yeah.
And then you click on it, it's like, come on.
Yeah, it's
Um,
like they should give some indicators. It's like, make it a more kind of shitty stage if you hated the book, or like,
right.
because yeah, you are right, because these photos are often so beautifully curated. It is almost funny in a juxtaposition to see it so wonderfully
Right.
done, and then to read the review, and it's like, oh,
Yeah.
okay.
So, I mean, like, I'm not egoless about the whole thing. Like, um, you know, I think I write really good books. I mean, I'm very happy with Pallbearers Club. I think it does what I wanted it to do. And I think it does it really well. And, you know, it feels weird to be like, it feels like yesterday I was like, oh, like, here's a new horror writer, now to be sort of like, to, to become out, like, you're an established or an older writer, which is an even more loaded phrase. Yeah, I don't know. That part of it's kind of weird too, or just even like I had said this to a friend who writes. I won't say who it is, but I have a fun relationship where I can sort of vent my maybe ungenerous thoughts about readers and whatnot, and I won't be judged, and it'll be a fun exchange.
Yeah.
Um, but like, one of the things that has sort of occurred to me is like, man, I've been writing since I'm closing in on 30 years, which is fucking insane. Like, if I first started messing around with writing in 1995, but for my first 5 years, I was very much what I would consider a hobbyist. Like, I wasn't super serious about it. Like, maybe I wrote like 4 short stories a year kind of thing. But for me, it was a very slow build. But like the idea that, man, I've been doing this for a long time. And, I wonder if a lot of sort of, I'll say older writers think about this. Like, the idea is like, hey, I've been doing this, and I've learned, and I've made mistakes, and I've gotten better, and I've learned all these things. And I'm at a point where it's like, wow, I can do some, I can do some interesting things that are maybe a little bit different. But the readers as a collection, uh, they're always the same, right? I mean, because every year there's younger readers, older readers sort of die and fall off. Like the group of readers as this colossus group, they stay the same. I mean, I think, if you want to be really negative, you could say readers getting worse in terms of of what they'll accept or what they can read, just because of all. I'll include myself in that group, because of all the distractions and how our brains are being changed by social media. So I don't know, maybe it's not a good or healthy way to think of it. Certainly in my case, to think about like, oh, like I can, I feel like I'm getting better, so how's that square with like the response that you might get sometimes? So I don't know. Those are things like I try not to think about too often, but like if I sort of go spinning down the hole, that's sort of what I end up thinking about sometimes, or have been recently, in response to some of the quote unquote polarizing reviews for Pallbearers Club.
It's interesting what you say about social media too. So, I mean, do you think that social media has affected your attention span? And do you think it has gone so far as to affect the books that you enjoy and the entertainment and art that you consume?
Oh, 100%. I think it's affected more my viewing experience as opposed to reading, because luckily I read so much that I don't feel like that's sort of crept in to that part yet. Because typically when I'm teaching and writing, I don't have a lot of time to watch like, television shows or the movies.
Right.
Those tend to be a little bit more like of a treat for me, as opposed to, I don't care how busy I am, I make sure I'm reading. So I've noticed like it's really hard for me to not look at my phone like 20 minutes into a movie, or however long. I would never do it in a theater, so maybe I just need to get out and go to the theater more often. But yeah, I find it creeping into the writing part too, just in terms of like the to open up the browser or to check the phone kind of thing, which is something that I'm going to have to actively do. But like the weird sort of Pandora's box of it is that you, as almost all writers, unless you're fortunate enough to be, I don't know, a Tessa Marshfeg or she's not on social media. Like, unless you're a lucky large writer that you don't need to be on social media. Just about all of us have to be there. It's the only way books are going to get sold, or that information about your books is going to get out there. A filmmaking friend who I mentioned earlier, Alejandro, said like, "Oh, I just turned off social media for a while." It was like brain Viagra. He described it. He talked about all the screenwriting he was getting. I was like, man, it's like, I wish I could. Like, I can't right now. Not like a few months after the new book has come out. I can't turn off social media. Maybe I can. Maybe I'm making too much of an excuse for myself. Social media is not all evil, of course. I've met and know so many people through it, but there's no doubt it affects, it rewires the brain.
Yeah. I mean, there's science, looking into that to, studies coming to that conclusion. So I think there's no
absolutely.
doubt that it does rewire. And I mean, it is an addictive drug, and it's absolutely been set out that way. So it's a tricky one. I think for us to not be part of social media, we have to do that with intentionality. So, I mean, coming up with rules like, okay, I will only check social media once or twice a day, or I will only look at it at this time or at that time, but then, you know, it, it it's easy to deviate from the own rules that you set. Like, it genuinely takes more willpower to not look at social media than it does to look at it. Or you might just think of something, or like, oh, I need to message this person. So it is a tricky one, but I think it is a problem. And it not only has it affected like the viewing experience for some people of movies, but it's affected our ability to be still. It's affected our ability to just enjoy the silence, which now sounds like a terrible Depeche Mode reference, but you know, it's like if we're at like a restaurant or something with someone, now if I'm with someone, then I'm not going to get my phone out. But if they go to the bathroom, it's more tempting to check or to scroll on my phone than to just be at peace with being alone. I think that's a problem, that we've become so addicted to this kind of Viagra for the brain, as it was put, that we can't just enjoy alone time.
No, for sure. I would say at the very least, and I did this in 2020, I shut off all notifications.
Oh yeah,
which was
yeah.
a beautiful first sort of step.
Yes,
because you know, at the time it was absolute madness how like my watch was vibrating, and
yeah,
you know, phone was vibrating with every sort of, not only social media stuff, but like, you know, the news tickers, etc.
yeah. Yeah, I've not had notifications on for a very long time. I have Twitter and I have Instagram on my phone, and that's it. But you know, there was a time when I didn't even have Twitter on, so I don't know. Maybe it shouldn't be on. It is a difficult one, because if it wasn't on, then I'd probably check into it less, and then to be using it on my computer, I have to very specifically and intentionally be using it. But at the same time, you know, I mentioned we look at our phones if someone goes to the bathroom, but as someone who likes to be productive, I mean, that is effectively dead time. So maybe I can promote something or have a conversation on social media, or use that time more effectively. So it's a tricky one. Now I'm wondering, when you're viewing a movie and you're kind of checking in on your phone, is that when you're viewing a movie alone, or is that actually when you're viewing it with someone else?
I'd say mostly. Well, I've caught myself doing it, I guess, alone, but also like occasionally, like if I'm watching it with my kid or something, because they go on their phone, it's almost like although we have like a free, well, my son, because he's a college student, has like a free Hulu account, but because it's quote unquote free, there's ads. So the ads become like the person going to the bathroom break. So, you know, we'll watch the movie, then an ad 20 minutes in. It's like, okay, we can look at our phone for 2 minutes. Oh, okay, the movie's back on. We can put the phone away.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, if I'm watching a movie, particularly with someone else, it's like no looking at phones. And if you look at your phone, not just you specifically, Paul, but anyone, then I will find that rude. I'll be like, what are you doing? No,
like no, never with friends or something.
Yeah, because this is movie time. But yeah, like I guess the advert break is different, but I can see how that can spill into like the movie coming back on. But I mean, this has almost certainly affected the way in which movies are made and TV is made anyway. Like, I guess like it's harder to have a slow burn because people don't have as much attention, and it is a real problem.
Right. And I don't know, I've come to sort of self-loathe or loathe even that, not that you used it incorrectly, but you know, the idea of slow burn. So I mean, that just means for most people that there aren't, explosions or things happening other than learning about like the characters, right?
Right.
Yeah. So I don't know.
I mean, yes, yeah, I guess so. But I mean, even more so, I mean, you can have some things and it's very Lynchian where you might have like a montage and there is no dialogue. So,
Right.
Yeah. I don't
I
think
just like reacting to, I think typically when people say, hey, this is a slow burn, they're telling you that, oh, it's not very plot heavy at the beginning or, in the first act or the first two acts.
Yeah, I guess it's different for different people because I mean, some
Right.
people described. I can't remember if you hate this film actually, because I think there's an Ari Aster film you hate. Do you like Hereditary?
Oh yeah, very much.
Okay, cool. So, I mean, some people would describe Hereditary as a slow burn because,
And those people
as
would
you
be wrong.
say, yeah, they would be wrong. Absolutely. Maybe I don't need to continue this because we're all coming to the same conclusion. Those people would be objectively wrong.
Yes.
but because, like, I mean, there's so much intrigue from the start with the characters and with the atmosphere. So
Right.
I guess different people have different definitions. What do you know? People are different. Wow, what a fucking revelation on This Is Horror. Nearly
I'm glad we
500
got to the bottom of
episodes.
that.
And that's the gem I'm coming out with.
See, and I like the term slow burn. Man, I don't see it as a negative at all. I may have at one point, but like if I'm telling someone about a film that's a slow burn, I think most of my friends know that, oh, so it's a film I need to pay attention to
Right.
because
Yeah.
something intense is going to happen. And if I don't pay attention during this first part, then by, I guess, halfway point, I'm going to be like, what? But I'm getting to a point now to where I love a film that's a good slow burn that just like takes its time.
Yeah.
I feel like that the intensity at the end is going to be a lot more personal for you, if that makes any kind of sense.
Oh no, absolutely. I mean, I don't mean to imply that it's. I guess what I'm sort of implying is I think more people, not all people, obviously, but I think more and more people sort of use slow burn now as like a code to say, hey, this is, it's almost a pejorative. Like not a lot happens, but stick with it. It gets better. Is that what I think slow burn has sort of become to me for most people? I could be totally wrong, but as someone who's written a few slow burns, that's what it feels like.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right. But I guess with present company, none of us use slow burn as, an insulting term.
Right. No, I say, oh, it's a slow burn.
Yeah, I like
Trying
the
to say,
way.
oh, it's really good.
Yeah, like Bob did put more emphasis on the burn. Maybe that's it. Maybe
like
it's
that.
in the pronunciation. It's like either it's a slow burn or it's a slow burn. Oh yeah, feel the burn.
Yeah, it's like I was trying to explain that or describe that movie Watcher, that's out with the young lady who was in It Follows, and I was explaining it to a coworker, and I used the term slow burn. And I guess it was the way I put it, and he just smiled. He said, "So yeah," he goes, "Okay," he goes, "I'm gonna check it out." So I sold him on it by using the word slow burn. But I have other friends that'd be like, instantly, it's a little bit of a slow burn, and no matter how I inflect it, to be like, oh, so it's like it's just when you got to sit there and think about. But like, no, you just got to watch it and pay attention. There's no thought. It's going to have you questioning things later, but it's not one you have to try to figure out. It's just a terminology I think that's slowly morphing into something that's not a negative but more positive in certain company. We're deal.
Right.
You just reminded me, Bob, because you did mention Watcher before, that I need to watch that film so
You
much.
need to watch it.
Same.
Because as well, that's exactly, as Bob knows, the kind of stuff that I'm into. Is it one of these annoying films that's on Shudder? And I should. Okay, I need to clarify that. Shudder is not in Japan. That's why. If you're a film on Shudder, you're an annoying film on Shudder. Shudder is very good. That's the thing that's annoying. It's a good fucking service that isn't here yet.
No, it's you can, I think you can rent it on. I rented it off of Prime. So it was after seeing the trailer and seeing the actress, because I really like I guess her name is Maka Monroe.
Yeah.
And I really I love It Follows.
Yeah.
And so when I seen that she was making another movie, and it was, the first thought is like, oh, she wants to be followed, so because she makes these, kind of thrillery type movies, and there's nothing supernatural about Watcher. It's just one of those movies that, and it's really simple. There's no twist, but it confirms a conviction that I have.
Yeah.
That, and I'll just say this, that always believe a woman when she tells you that.
Yeah, well, don't say too much about this film, because I'm very averse to spoilers.
He doesn't like the spoilers, Paul.
I fucking hate them. I fucking hate them. I'm not scared of them. But you said that you watched the trailer, but I just can't watch trailers anymore. And it is ridiculous the amount of trailers these days that literally give the entire film away. Now I'm not saying anything of the quality of this film, but there's a film called Mama, and after I saw that film, I went back and I watched the trailer, and it just gave every single plot point, including the end, away. Because it's almost like, well, let's just put the highlight reel of the film into the trailer, but now you've just put everything into it. So I know I watch trailers after I've watched the film. I don't know why I do that, but, and then it confirms my kind of stance to not watch trailers, because it's like, yep, they gave everything away.
Yeah, I definitely tend to avoid trailers for movies I'm really excited about that are coming out. Just because of that fear of the spoiler.
Yeah. Now, in terms of your next book, am I right in thinking it's another short story collection?
Yeah, it is. I wasn't expecting, we had talked about pitching the Pallbearers Club to get back on deal, and they offered me 3-book deal again, with the middle book being a short story collection. I was like, oh, okay. So yeah, next summer, the short story collection will be out, and it's called The Beast You Are.
Oh.
And with a loose sort of, I guess, monster theme. Not every story is a monster story, but there's, I'd say maybe half the stories involve a monster, maybe a little bit more than half of some kind. And the collection features an original novella. It's about 30,000 words, 120 or so pages. It's the title novella. It's called The Beast You Are, and it's an anthropomorphic animal novella with a giant monster and a cat that's a slasher. And I wrote it in free verse because, I know what the market wants.
There you go.
Oh my goodness. Is that going to be the closer?
Yeah, that'll be the closer. And I have to admit, that was some of the most fun I've ever had writing. It's not to say it was easy to write at all. It wasn't, but I don't know. I really enjoyed. I typically don't enjoy writing, and I would say that like as a jokey, flippant thing. I mean, writing's work. What the part I'm addicted to is having a completed thing. Like that's when I'm like, oh wow, this is amazing. I wrote this and I want to show it to people. But yeah, writing that crazy story was a lot of fun. It's definitely an ode to things like Watership Down, the Secrets of Nim, even something like Animal Farm, anything with talking animals. There's definitely, everyone's got a talking animal story in them somewhere, right? So
Right.
I think I was bound by writerly law to write one.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's interesting that they commissioned a short story collection. Now, did you, when they were kind of deciding what to take on, did you pitch this as a possibility, or did they specifically say, we want another short story collection, and you hadn't even mentioned whether you had one or not?
Yeah, it was the latter. I had
Wow.
not mentioned a short story collection. I wasn't even sure if I had enough for another one, frankly. Um, yeah, and I definitely didn't tell them about the anthropomorphic animal thing until I wrote
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
I typically don't have story ideas like that hang around for a while. Like I
Mm.
kind of, so what I mean is like I go from book to book, and like each time I have to start over and think of something. It's not like I've got a bullpen of ideas and like, oh, I'm going to write this now and then I'll write that later. It's like, no, I wish I had those stories hanging around. But in this case, I'd had the general idea for The Beast You Are for a long time,
Mm.
but I thought it had to be a novel. And I'm like, there's no way they're going to go for an anthropomorphic animal novel.
Mm.
So when they said the short story collection, I was like, oh, I'll write this as a short novel or a novella. And it ended up being the perfect length. So yeah, I'm optimistic about that. Hopefully people will enjoy it.
Yeah. Do you know much in terms of the logic as to why they wanted to commission 2 novels and a short story collection? Because, I mean, I would think from a commercial point of view that typically short story collections don't sell as well as novels. But
No, they definitely don't.
yeah. So I, from a business stance, it seems like an odd choice for them to make. But I mean, maybe they're looking at this more from a kind of literary or artistic point of view, and just kind of, yeah, that there's like a rhythm in terms of having 2 novels
Yeah,
and another short story collection.
sure. I have to admit, I'm when they offered it, it was more like, okay, like I won't ask why. um,
Mm,
I do think they're very happy with uh, growing things and how it
mm,
did. Certainly critically, I mean that book, I think more than any book, got the most press.
ah,
Oddly enough,
mm,
it was like a New York Times notable book. So I don't know.
mm,
I also maybe she, in past conversations, I've talked about like I like having 2 years or a year in between novels, kind of thing. So maybe she had that sort of in her mind as
mm,
well. Um, she's gonna kill me if I tell you the story. But my editor Jennifer is wonderful, good friend. She saved my career. She's the best. She edits Joe Hill and Neil Gaiman, um, and so like 2020 we had the deal. We signed it. So now it's this spring, April 2021. Which in some ways felt like 5 years later. I
mm.
turned in my collection to the agent, and he sent it to Jen. She's like, I love it. Um, I'll get back to you with an offer. And he was like, what? He's like, Jen, this is in the contract. And she's like, oh my God, I can't believe I forgot.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know. Strategy. I guess she likes short stories.
Yeah. Yeah.
She almost bought it twice.
Yeah. 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 Should have kept quiet. Yeah.
Right. Yep.
Agent being honest is like, come on, no, sell it her twice. If she's listening to this, she'll be glad that I'm not your agent. Like, bloody hell.
Yeah.
I mean, do you know what kind of considerations go into whether they do or don't give you a new contract in terms of renewing? Is that something you're kind of privy to? I mean, one presumes, of course, book sales
Right.
and reception is going to factor into that, but I mean, what other things might go into whether you do or don't get a new book contract.
Right. So I'm not 100% privy, but I would say in general, though, I think, these days, with the big five, like the sales department opinion of the book, if they think they're gonna be able to sell it, if it's gonna do well, so definitely has weight. And if your editor is new or hasn't been around that long, I would say the sales department probably has more weight than your editor does. I'm super fortunate that Jen, has been at William Morrow for decades, and I mentioned her other clients, that she edits for, so she definitely, carries a lot of weight. So in my case, I'm super fortunate, to have, a track record with them now, obviously, with the Head Full of Ghosts, and, Disappearance didn't sell as well, but, Cabin, did very well, so, they've been happy with sort of the trajectory and how the books have done so far. So we'll see if that continues. Hopefully it does.
Yeah, and one would assume that as soon as Cabin is on the big screen that the sales are going to explode. And so, I mean, frankly, not recontracting an author who's about to have,
Right.
the biggest movie deal of their career would seem a bit of an error. But luckily,
Yeah.
Jen did not make that error, so it's all
Right.
good.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, I hope the movie translates into book sales. I mean, in some sense, that requires cooperation from, the studio and the filmmaker too, insofar as, this is my first time with this experience, and, the idea of having a media tie-in edition, right? Like a copy of the book that's got art from the movie. And that's kind of, from what I've been learning, is a lot more work and involved in that, getting permission, especially in a tight turnaround, like if the movie's going to come out in February. So, I'm hopeful it's going to happen, but we'll see. I'm not sure, 100% sure if it is going to happen or not, though.
Yeah.
Not from a lack of want for my publisher, I can assure you.
Yeah. Well, how did the sales for Survivor Song compare with previous books? Because I'm wondering how COVID might have impacted sales amongst other factors.
Yeah. I mean, it earned out its advance, which was great, after a year, but, it didn't sell as well as Cabin at the End of the World did. So it's probably, not counting Pallbearers Club because it just came out, but I'd say it sits in the number 3 spot for sales. But I mean, just the idea that it earned out its advance is I don't want to say good enough for me, but it is. Because if you earn out your advance, that's much more likely that your publisher is going to continue to work with you. If they then lose money, that's where problems can arise. A Head Full of Ghosts has sold the most, even though it was never qualified as a bestseller, but it's just had this amazingly long tail. Like, it's this book that's almost 7 years old now, and it still sells pretty well. Like, which in some aspects is the dream. Like, have a cult novel like that just it's never going to make a bestseller list, but it's going to continually sell enough just to get like a decent royalty check every 6 months.
Yeah, and I mean, I think as well, A Head Full of Ghosts, it marked a kind of change in the Paul Tremblay style from crime to horror writer. So I imagine
for sure.
a lot of people who are new to your work are going to want to pick it up just to see, like, okay, well, this is where the horror began.
Absolutely. With a big heaping thank you help from Stephen King and tweeting about that book, certainly, gave that book a second life or a first life. I don't know. I guess a second life is probably more accurate, but
yeah. No one's going to ever grumble at a tweet from Stephen King, or at least a positive tweet. Maybe they'll grumble if they get a negative one. It's going to be the same impact, but, bad luck for 1,000 years. I think that's what happens if Stephen King curses you. But I mean, for the Pallbearers Club, of course, the book tour is going to be vastly different to Survivor Song because you've been traveling and internationally. So you were in Spain a few months back. So what has the book tour looked like?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess it's a little bit of a hybrid kind of thing, where like the first week the book came out, I did some live events, uh, somewhat locally to me. I did one in Boston, Pennsylvania, and New York City, and then I went to Spain. After that, I did some virtual events with Mysterious Galaxy Bookstore in San Diego and Powell's in Portland. And I did one more live book event in Beverly, which is where I grew up and where much of the Pallbearers Club is set, and that was a lot of fun. Um, you know, family, went to that event, which made it interesting. Yeah, and then it was off to Spain, which was a lot of fun. I mean, I'd never been on the continent of Europe before. I'd been lucky enough to go to the UK fairly recently, but this was my first time setting foot in Europe, the continent. Not that the UK isn't in Europe. I just like saying continental Europe.
Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah. So no, that was wonderful. What a beautiful. We were in the very north of Spain, in a town called Aviles, which is in the region, the Asturias region. I don't know if I'm saying it correctly. It was like the only place in Spain that wasn't on fire, either with actual fire or the temperatures. It was, it was lovely. It was only like in the 70s.
Well, always a bonus.
There.
Yeah.
And this was during the heat wave, or one of the heat waves, I should say. It was a lot of fun. Very fortunate, that I got to go over with friends. Grady Hendrix and Stephen Graham Jones was there, and I met Lauren Bucas, who was wonderful, and got to meet Mariana Enriquez, who's my favorite horror writer right now. She's amazing. Yeah, and it was an amazing experience. Worth getting COVID, I suppose, which is what I arrived home with.
Oh, God.
For the first time, I managed to teach 2 years in a pandemic and not get it. But
yeah.
The trip to Spain got me.
Yeah, which is no insult to Spain. I'm sure just
a
coincidence.
No.
That we don't want the headline in Entertainment Weekly. Tremblay says like Spain is riddled with COVID.
Yeah, no. In fact, I won't name the author, but I will say I'm fairly sure a British author gave me COVID.
Oh, Jesus, you're now insulting the Brits. I was happier with it.
The Brits. Yeah, everybody.
I mean, I wonder, why Spain? Do you have a particularly, big readership in Spain? Because there's a lot of great places with a lot of great readers all over continental Europe.
Sure. Well, I mean, this was a literary festival, a speculative fiction literary festival called Celsius 232. In recent years, they've had Cassandra Khaw, and I think, was Chuck Mendig there? Chuck might have been there. I forget. And other, science fiction, fantasy, and horror writers. So, I think they've been in business for about 13 or 14 years. So, they approached me. They said, "We want you to come over as a guest." So I was like, "Yes, geez, thank you." They paid for everything, which was amazing. So it wasn't necessarily that I picked Spain to go for a tour. It's like, Spain came to me. But I will say Nocturna, the publisher there, has published 3 of my novels. Headful of Ghosts, Disappearance, The Devil's Rock, and The Cabinet at the End of the World. And they're going to publish Pallbearers Club as well. So out of the European countries outside of the UK, I think that's the country with the second most of my books.
All right. So other European countries have been put on notice. They've got to up their game. This is what you need to do. We just try and challenge other people, and they bring their A game, and it just ultimately elevates your sales. You start these little wars.
I like the way you think. Maybe you should be, again, another instance where you should be my agent.
There you go. I don't want your agent to hear this. It's like fucking hell. The whole conversation, Michael David Wilson's just trying to become Paul's new agent. But, I don't think he's in, or she, or they are in any danger of that happening because, they've got you in front of William Morrow and these fantastic film deals and being edited by you're the editor who edits Joe Hill and Neil Gaiman. So frankly, I think you're onto a good thing. I think it would be
Yeah.
a bad career move to pivot to
No.
me as your agent.
All right.
But I understand then that at the moment you're writing a new novel.
I am.
Good. I'm glad that I understood that correctly. And I
Yeah.
also know that you didn't actually write an outline for it. So is it scary not having that outline, or is it liberating?
A little of both. Yeah, I mean, definitely a little of both. But I haven't been scared enough to like, oh, I'm going to write an outline. So I mean, I'm keeping notes, and there's sort of two timelines that like I'll keep sort of track of just in a notebook, but not writing. And one of the timelines I pretty much know, the other one I don't. So that's the more scary part. It's like, oh, what the hell am I going to do in this timeline? Yeah, so we'll see. Again, I think this one's a little bit different. Certainly a lot different than Pallbearers Club. Although I do think there's a little bit of a connection too that I don't want to, not ready to talk about necessarily. But geez, maybe I'll see the title for the first time for your podcast,
Here we
episode 12/13. So it's called Horror Movie, a Novel.
Whoa. Okay. Okay. Shit.
I like it.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I'll get my credit card out now.
It's kind of catchy. Yeah, we'll see.
I'm so intrigued. I'm so intrigued,
Very
and
good.
I think you've put that out there as a pitch to be like, see, you've got to invite me back on for episodes 13 and 14 at a Paul Tremblay show, which at that point it might just be rebranded to.
Well, you'll just have to get Stephen Graham Jones on a little bit more often.
Yeah,
John Langan's got to be up there too, right?
Yeah. John Langan has been on a number of times, but not the level of you and Stephen Graham Jones.
Number of times.
Yeah.
But yeah, he's cameoed as well from winning some This Is Horror awards, so that's got his numbers up too.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, off air we spoke about he did try to cameo this episode, but circumstances got in the way, so he's putting up a fight. So
he's very good at cameos. He does a lot of cameos in other podcasts as well.
Yeah, particularly when you're there, it seems.
If there was like a Hollywood Squares of like horror podcasts, John would be the center.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think at any time that you or Laird Barron have a podcast, there's probably a 50% chance that like John Langan is going to appear. Even if he's not in your house, it might be like surprise. If you're podcasting and you hear like someone enter your house and you weren't expecting it, don't worry. It's probably just John Langan letting himself in. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, it's almost like you two are the only ones like brave enough to talk to like me or Laird on our own. It's like, oh, we have to talk to those guys. We'll get Langan to do it.
Yeah. Well, we need to do something to separate us from the other horror conversation podcast. So, yeah, this is almost turning into like a Langan-free zone. Langan's gonna get very upset. We're not saying
John.
We're anti John Langan. We're just saying.
No, we send John love and hugs.
Yeah. John love and hugs. Well. Goodness, I should probably wrap up the conversation. I did it.
Love and hugs. That's
I did have some other things I was going to jump into, but we've now exceeded the 2-hour mark. So, I mean, thank you as always for spending such. Yeah. Okay. Thank me.
Oh no. I mean, thank you for letting me, come back on like so often. I mean, it's a pleasure. I love. Discussing the books with you too. And I don't know, like if you ask questions that like, make me stop and think and hem and haw, which is good. Like, I'm never quite sure what you're going to ask. And I mean that like in the best possible way. You guys always come up with things either I haven't been asked or I really haven't considered.
Mm-hmm. Well, that is wonderful to hear. And yeah, when we hear things like that, it just, inspires us and encourages us to keep going. It shows that we must be doing something right. So thank you very much.
Keep going. Just for the next T-shirt that you guys make, there's a picture of me on the back. Like, you guys can be on the front. Like, this is horror. And I'll just be on the back, like, waving.
Should we just have like a cartoon version of you giving the thumbs up and the caption,
Yeah.
keep going?
Yeah.
Keep going. Love and hugs.
Yeah. Yeah. And then in the corner, so small, almost like undetectable, it's just John Langan's face.
Oh, you'd sell at least 10 of those.
Yeah. Now, for anyone who hasn't listened to the previous 12 episodes or 10 episodes, I can't even remember now with you on, where can they connect with you?
So as much as, after talking about social media, I'm on Twitter at Paul G. Tremblay. Same for Instagram at Paul G. Tremblay. I'm on Facebook as well. Just no G in that case. I will say on my website, which is paultremblay.net, there's a sign up for a newsletter that I promise I don't spam your inbox, super often, maybe like once a month.
All right. Do you have any final thoughts to leave our listeners with?
No, other than since we talked about John, besides Pallbearers Club, you should go out and read his Corpse Mouth and other autobiographies. And actually, in some ways, it would have been interesting to have him here to talk about the ways his short fiction are, like that collection in particular, is very much a lot of what's, it says it in the title, and other autobiographies, very personal to John. And it's a very, like all John's work, brilliant, creepy, but also quite moving, the last story in particular. And also a book that I've been shouting the praises of to look forward to. I'm not quite sure when it's being published in the UK. I'm going to assume it's at the same time as the US. But Mariana Enriquez's novel, Our Shade of Night, is coming February 3rd, and it's one of the best novels I have ever read.
All right. Well, you don't get much higher praise than that.
Mm-hmm.
And it is interesting with you and John Langan that you've both released your most autobiographical book at relatively the same time. So
maybe we're the same person. Now, too many people have seen us together.
Yeah, which would make it even more impressive if you are, in fact, the same person. So there you go. Thank you so much for listening to the This Is Horror podcast with Paul Tremblay. Join us again next time when we will be chatting with Will Carver, who returns to talk about his forthcoming book, Suicide Thursday. And if you want to listen to that ahead of the crowd, if you want to listen to every episode ahead of the crowd, then become our patron at patreon.com/thisishorror. Not only do you get early bird access to each and every episode, but you can submit questions to our interviewees. And coming up shortly, we'll be chatting to the likes of Jonathan Jans, Cynthia Paleo, John Niven, and many more. So that's patreon.com/thisishorror. Check it out and see if it's a good fit for you. Okay, before I wrap up, a little bit of an advert break.
Tried and True or Done to Death. It Was All a Dream, an anthology of bad horror tropes done right, revives even the most exhausted cliches with stories from some of horror's biggest names like Gemma Files, Gabini Iglesias, and Haley Piper. It Was All a Dream, an anthology of bad horror tropes done right, available anywhere you buy books online. Use this code THISISHORROR for 20% off through the month of October when you order direct from HungryShadowPress.com. Horror on Main, a new weekend convention for the horror community. Exploring all the shadows of horror, our guests include writers and actors, but also artists, publishers, directors, composers, and more. We've been going to cons for over 20 years and are changing up the little things to make the big picture amazing. Beyond guests, contests, movies, panels, and podcasters, our layout and programming are designed to further incorporate the very idea of community. Join us Memorial Day weekend 2023 in Hunt Valley, Maryland. Come to the block party and meet your new neighbors. HorrorOnMain.com.
As always, I would like to end with a quote. And I know that this has been a rough year, a rough few years for a number of us. And so I would like to turn to Seneca. And Seneca said, "Two elements must be rooted out once and for all: the fear of future suffering and the recollection of past suffering, since the latter no longer concerns me and the former concerns me not yet." I'll see you in the next episode, Will Carver. But until then, take care of yourselves, be good to one another, read horror, keep on writing, and have a great, great day.
This is Horror Podcast.